I'm Jaden Sterling, and welcome to my podcast, Intuitive Investing. As an entrepreneur and someone who has taught people how to invest for 34 years, I have a good sense of what it takes to thrive as an investor. Each week on my show, I provide tools and tips, as well as interview world-class investors on their strategies. When your gut and research match, your ability to live a life of financial freedom is easy. Welcome to Intuitive Investing, and let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Intuitive Investing. I have a really special guest for you today. I was so excited about having Dr. Don on the show today. As soon as he booked for the show, I've just been like over the moon excited about interviewing him and hearing what he has to say, and I know you will be too. I'll read you his formal introduction and then I'll let Dr. Don take it away. Dr. Don Wood is a PhD, author, speaker, founder and CEO of the Inspired Performance Institute and creator of the patented TIP, T-I-P-P method. TIP is a cutting-edge method inspired and developed through the newest developments in neuroscience and designed to clear away the effects of disturbing or traumatic events, repurpose old patterns, and set the individual's mind up for peak performance. Y'all see why I was excited to have Dr. Don on the show today? In essence, it reboots the brain's stuck thought patterns, making it possible to enhance alpha oscillations with a non-invasive and effective shift in brainwave activity. He's the author of 2 top-selling books, Emotional Concussions. That's the coolest title ever, Dr. Don. And You Must Be Out of Your Mind. I love that. Dr. Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jane. I'm glad to be here. And just like you talked about when you sort of smiled with emotional concussions, a lot of the people, right, are probably listening to this who are in the financial world have emotional concussions from losses, right, even earlier in their childhood. So I think this will really be helpful, having an understanding of how those things affect the way you would invest and maybe some of the fears about, taking those chances and why you can't sometimes pull the trigger on that trade. So I think this will be very informative.
I think so too, Dr. Don. There's no question that belief systems play a gigantic role in someone's ability to select winning investments. Let's just dive in. Tell me more. I'm so curious. I call it brain baked when you have a thought pattern that continues to loop over and over again, even if it doesn't serve you. You have a way to get around that. Tell me about it.
What's really interesting is when people say to me, I sabotage myself, what I tell them is that's impossible. So even though it looks like it's not serving you well, your mind thinks it is. It's actually trying to protect you from getting hurt again. So those beliefs and habits and behaviors that show up are basically glitches. They're error messages. Your mind is thinking that it's making the right move to take you in another direction. So it's never going to try to hurt you. It's going to try to protect you. And what I talk about is those are coming from traumatic events, or what I call, which are the big T traumas, the obvious ones, or they could be coming from what I termed as emotional concussions, which are the small T traumas. And they could be, losing out on something, that you could have, or a coach or a teacher or somebody that told you you're not smart enough, you'll never make it. Even dealing with a parent with sometimes the best of intentions can create these emotional concussions and fears. And I'll give you a good example because this is a perfect example for the world you're in. Is I had a guy who came to see me, and he very successful trader, options, derivatives, things like that, making about $2 million a year. So doing pretty good. What he said to me is the fourth quarter came, he shut down all the time. And he had 2 partners that he worked with. And he said, I would make all kinds of excuses about, I just need a couple weeks off. I'm going to go on a vacation, all the different things that he kept trying to use as excuses. Right. And he said, I just could not get motivated in that fourth quarter. And the start of the year would come, he'd be right back on track. So what we discovered through the whole process, the TIP method that I use and the process that I use is a 4-hour reset. And what we discovered is in that period of time, which he never connected these two things, his father was his mentor. His father was his hero. He really admired and loved his father. He says, and he was very successful, but his father went bankrupt 4 times. And he said, I remember flying in private jets and then leaving in the middle of the night, leaving our house because we were being chased by creditors. And he says, we went on this roller coaster throughout his childhood. What his mind was actually doing was protecting him from the risk of that fourth quarter, where his mind was saying, we've made a couple $1,000,000, we're pretty good, right? Let's not take any chances. So as soon as he got to that, what in his mind felt successful, his mind wouldn't sabotage him, was actually protecting him about losing it. So that was what was going on for him. So after we went through the program, he said, I felt this amazing sense of clarity on my drive home. And he said, and then he called me on December 15th, telling me that it was his last day in the office, right? He was now taking the rest of the year off, and he had his best year ever. But he didn't know that that's what was going on. It was a subconscious protection system that was built in from very early in his childhood.
Interesting. So he had this blind spot that he couldn't see. It was a pattern from childhood, which so many people have around money, Dr. Don. I mean, I hear it all the time, from stories like when parents say to a child, what do you think? Money grows on trees, or it very seldom do I hear enriching childhood stories around money and finance. We know that it's one of the things that is not seldom talked about growing up. There's two topics, right? Money's one of them. And so, Dr. Don, how do you take someone? I mean, I know you have a lengthy 4-hour process, like you mentioned, but are there any quick things that people can do to pivot thoughts back to a more empowering thought?
It's very difficult if you don't get to the root of the trauma. Can you do it? Yes. But it's like painting over rust. So you can paint over it and it'll look good for a little while, but the rust will bubble up at some point. So the key is to really get to the true cause of what's creating that belief system. So what we're really doing in that 4-hour session is sanding it down, priming it, and then painting it. And then it sticks. Because as long as the mind is looping through that traumatic event, the belief system or the behavior that gets created from it is a code. It's just simply a code. The brain is constantly coding. So I always explain it this way. Think of the brain, the physical brain, is the computer. The mind is the software. So if I take my computer, the physical brain, and I drop it, I'm going to damage it, right? But software is prone to glitches and error messages, and that's coming in from coding. So if you've had experiences where you've taken losses, or just like you said, money doesn't grow on trees, those little things, your mind will build a code up because a child doesn't have enough life experience to understand what that term just meant. So they take it, especially in those early development years of the brain, they take that literally. And then that creates a belief system that I just can't do this on I'm just not going to make this grow. How can I make it grow? It doesn't grow on trees. Money doesn't grow on trees. So then that sets a formula for how to be successful. And it can create all kinds of issues and it'll show up because the parent may be trying to send an intentional good message, but because the child doesn't have enough life experience, they're going to put an interpretation on it. Do you ever play when you were kids, play that telephone game where you whisper in someone's ear, then they whisper in the other person's ear, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely different, right?
Yes.
That's what it is to be a child. And so your parents said this, the intention may have been great, but then by the time your mind goes through this process of interpreting it, it comes out completely different. And there's where the issue comes in. So even with the best of intentions, a parent can do like this guy His father's not trying to hurt his success. Obviously, the gentleman was very successful, but he had another gear. He just didn't know how to get to that gear. And so that's what I talk about is we all have another gear. How do we reach it? We get to the root of the issue that's interfering with that next level of performance.
Yeah, and I'm with you. There's when you talk about like peak performance, high performers, it seems like a lot of those folks are doing something differently than most other people. In your practice and in your business, Dr. Don, what do you see are some of the attributes of the peak performers?
They basically, so that's what I wrote the second book about. I called it emotional concussions. So they'll show up in different ways. And the kinds of things to look for are, do you procrastinate? And so what I put in the book is here are the things that successful people don't do. So for example, procrastinate. Successful people won't procrastinate. Now that probably came in from fear, right? So say, for example, you had a parent. So I had a lady who, very successful entrepreneur, doing very well, by all standards would be considered a successful entrepreneur. But she said to me, I just procrastinate. I always put things off to the last minute, and then I'm always stressed to try to get something done. And what we discovered is her mother was a principal at a school. And so when she was growing up, her mother would always make her bring her homework. And so she would check her homework. So her mother would always redline all the things that she thought she needed to fix or change. So here she is growing up as a child constantly, and was her mother trying to hurt her? No, she's trying to help her. But a child feels like I can't get anything right. So they want to put off that pain as long as they can. And so she developed this habit of waiting to the last minute because it's pretty hard, right, to get criticized or have to make a change at the last minute. You just have to go with what you've got. And so that's what her mind was really trying to protect her from. So procrastination, disorganization, blaming other people when something goes wrong, right? So, as a trader and investor, right, a stock goes wrong. Well, I should never have listened to Jaden tell me that because that's what went wrong, right? Had I not listened to him or had I not done this or done that, no, as you know, the stock market and the investing world is not foolproof. So there's going to be ups and downs. You're going to have good and bad. But the idea is to accept that you made the decision, right? And not blame somebody else when something goes wrong. That's what successful people do. And stay in your lane, right? So if you're really good in one area, you're really good at seeing, the oil industry, the gas industry or whatever, and you've developed a pretty good idea of how that industry works, stay in your lane and do what you know well. And once you start going outside of that, right, sometimes you may make some mistakes. So those are the kinds of things that I wrote about in the emotional concussions, what to look for. And if you find that you're doing some of these things, it's coming from something like that.
Such a good point. You brought up a lot of good key tactical points, like don't procrastinate, stay organized, do these things that are in your wheelhouse, really important things for success. And yet, there's plenty of successful people out there, but then there's the real rock stars, the people who are just crushing it. They win race after race. They win competitions. They win in the stock market. Like they have this good thing going in their life. And I am so curious to hear it from you, who studied neuroscience and all of your education and background. What else really sets people apart? Like that book, Good to Great. Um,
Mhm.
in your mind, what is it that makes that leap from good to great?
Number one is being able to stay present. And so what I mean by that is not so, and I work with professional golfers, for example. And what separates those that are good from great are the people that are able to handle the adversity. Because I don't care who you are, I don't care what investor you are, Warren Buffett makes mistakes, right? But he's not worried about the mistake he made. He's focusing on what he's going to be able to do next and learning from those mistakes and taking them in stride. The people who struggle with that, right? They're constantly second guessing themselves, right? Thinking, oh, I shouldn't have made that mistake. The problem is the way the mind works is your subconscious mind, your survival brain, is running about 95% of everything, and it's fully present in the moment. So the problem that comes in is that when you think, I should have done this, your mind then thinks you could have changed that because it's seeing that mistake in real time. So now it wants to correct it. And so my wife grew up with a lot of trauma as a child. She was always what ifing her life. And I had no trauma as a child. So I could never understand why she was always going, don't you wish we had have done this? Or don't you wish that never happened? Her mind was going over the things that went wrong. And in her mind, she could fix them, even though that was subconscious. Consciously, logically, she knew that wasn't true. But the subconscious sees everything in real time. So if you look at a trade that you made a year ago and you think, I never should have made that trade, here's what your subconscious hears. Don't make that trade a year ago because it doesn't understand time. It has no connection to time. Everything is now. So if your mind thinks that you could fix something, it's going to spend a lot of energy on trying to fix that. But you can't fix it, but your mind will continue to expend energy, which gives you less ability to stay focused and present. And so one of the things that was very interesting is we worked with a company that works with high performing athletes, like the best athletes in the world. And what I explained to them is that when we have this unresolved trauma, we actually affect the mitochondria, the ATP, the energy in the cell. And so if the mind has this trauma loop, it's expending some of that energy on that old trauma loop, trying to make it different, fix it. And so after we took their whole group through the program, and one of the guys said to me, he says, you just blew my mind. You just explained something that we never understood why it was happening. He says, we're taking these highly tuned, top performing athletes who are in the peak physical condition, and they measure heart rate variability, which is basically what's going on and how the nervous system is responding. We couldn't understand why, when they were just at rest at times, just sitting at their desk, sitting in their car, wherever it was, they would go into a sympathetic nervous system response. They would go into a fight or flight response for no reason. And we were trying to figure out why their heart rate variability would drop when there was no need for a sympathetic nervous system response. What you're telling me is it's that loop of trauma that's running, and the mind is seeing it in real time, but you're not consciously aware of it. So if you've got traumas, whether they're financial traumas or they're, mistakes that you've made in your life, and your mind continues to loop through that, now maybe you have 80% of your energy available to focus on the new trades. The difference between good and great, the other guys are not thinking about the trades that they lost. And the best way to look at this is Annie Duke. Have you heard of Annie Duke? She's a
Yes.
professional poker player, the female. I love the way she described it. The reason she was successful is she says she developed an attitude of being outcome blind. And she says, what I meant by that is I know what cards I have in my hand. I know what cards I've played. I know what the other players have played. What I don't know is what they're holding and what's still in the deck. So based on my knowledge and experience, I'm pretty good as a poker player. I would have to make a calculation based on my experience of seeing these patterns. And then I would make a decision to either fold or go in. And she says, so if I folded and I could have won, or I stayed in and lost, I was outcome blind because I knew the averages were on my side based on my experience. So I was blind to the outcome. I played the next hand. That's the key to success. Does that make sense?
I love it. It totally does. I mean, it just brings me to some bad investments I've made in the past, and I keep reliving that. I keep my wife and I even talk about it. We give it airtime, and even though intuitively I feel like, okay, let's just move past it, but in reality, it's still getting our energy. It's taking our energy. It's working on our mitochondria. It's not allowing us to come up with another really brilliant idea when it comes to being an equity investor. I think that's what I hear you saying is you got to move past it.
It's okay that you learned from it. So you've built a code. So just like Annie Duke was talking about, she had a lot of codes built up about patterns and the way people play certain hands in certain situations. That's fine. The problem comes in is when you start thinking about, I should have done it this way. When you start having those conversations with your wife, that's going to hold you back. So that coding is okay. And I talk about this as it's a great way to explain it as well. And I use sports as an analogy because I'm a big sports guy. So you take Michael Jordan, and probably maybe one of the greatest athletes of all time. You take him from basketball and put him into baseball. Why can't he dominate baseball the way he dominated basketball? Same athletic ability, right? And what I explain is he hasn't built enough codes. He's now playing at the highest level. And so he has only seen so many pitches. So what a professional baseball player is able to do is, so I worked with one guy who they told me that they're trying to get him to understand that certain pitchers in certain situations, like certain counts, a 2-1 count with this pitcher, he has a 70%, chance that he's going to throw you a slider, right? They're cramming his head full of these stats. And they asked me, what do you think about that? And I said, it's a terrible idea. You can't think and hit a baseball. I said, this professional athlete has built thousands of codes in his brain. He has seen pitches come in from that height with that spin at that speed so many times that on average, the ball is going to end up in about this location. Harvard did a study, said it is actually impossible to hit a major league fastball. Our brains cannot actually respond fast enough to hit a major league baseball. So what did that mean? It's actually operating off of the codes. He had built enough codes in his brain to know on average, I've got to get the bat into about this position, right? Not calculating just from the codes. And so it's the same thing with investing. The more you've invested, even though you've made a mistake, you've added to the code, but don't start analyzing, am I doing it right or wrong? Trust that you've built the codes up. And if it feels right, chances are you're right.
Oh, Don, that's so powerful. It reminds me of today's sponsor for our show, which is the Sterling Stock Picker. We're just going to spend a minute talking about Sterling Stock Picker. It's software that we created, invented 4 years ago to help the average investor become an expert investor. Easy to follow. You can see our platform here. This is the home page where I live stream in here every single week talking about the investment environment and how to navigate it to the best of your ability. We have lots of information for you, news reports, the latest social alerts. Our software uses AI and machine learning so that you can easily pick stocks without having to know or become an expert as an investor. The software is called sterlingstockpicker.com. Please check it out. Dr. Don, take it away.
Well, that's brilliant because it's exactly what I'm just talking about. Using your computer or this computer is going to be able to calculate much better and much faster. So it's a great way to, especially for investors that don't have the time to do all that analysis, right? They can then find, ways, and nothing's foolproof. So you've got to be able to accept the wins with the losses, but on the average, as long as you're winning more than you're losing, outcome blind. The mistake that most people are making that you're probably seeing all the time is nobody wants to make a mistake, right? So then they start second guessing their mistake. And so don't do that. Don't keep talking about the losses, because then you're reinforcing that you're not good at this, right? And then that brings in fear, which then is going to activate your nervous system. And now you're going to be trying to make a decision when you're in the most stress. And we don't make our best decisions when we're stressed. We make them when we're calm. And so you have to train your brain to be able to stay in that alpha, what I talk about, alpha brain waves. We want, and that's what when you mentioned in the introduction, our goal is to maximize those alpha oscillations. Albert Einstein, they said, lived in an alpha brainwave state most of the time. So his mind was super relaxed, super focused. Why did information flow so easily for him? Because he was in that state. So normally, if you've had a lot of losses or you're second guessing yourself, you're going to be in a very high beta brainwave state. That's where the mind feels stressed. We don't make our best decisions when we're in a stressed mode. We make it when we're relaxed and focused. And this is what the $2 million guy said to me. He said, it was so much easier every time I started making decisions after that. I was much more relaxed when I was making them. And even though everyone didn't work, he says, I wasn't stressing over it. And he says, and I made more money by staying calmer than getting stressed out.
I believe it. Any easy way to get to the alpha brain state?
You can do it through meditation. You can do it through breathing. There's a few different ways. So you're basically trying to calm down the vagus nerve. And that's basically training the brain to be able to stay there. So that's why meditation can help. That's why breathing. If you get a lot of oxygen into your system, it's very hard for your brain to feel threatened because it's got a lot of oxygen. But I'll tell you what happens is when we get stressed, and this is what I learned from my wife. We would be just sort of sitting somewhere, even driving in the car, and all of a sudden she'd go, and I'd like, what was that? And she goes, I just stopped breathing, right? She was stressed, so she wasn't breathing, right? And all of a sudden she'd have to just catch her breath. She'd go, and that's what happens when we get under a lot of stress. What happens is then that makes the situation worse, because now the system's not getting enough oxygen, which makes the brain think this problem must be big, right? We're running low on oxygen. We must be being chased by a lion. And so then it's going to make the situation worse. So doing breathing exercises, practicing that kind of breathing, will continue to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. And then that calms everything down. So that's just training. Now, obviously, ideally, the best thing to do is to get rid of the old trauma first and then practice these things. But if you can't do that, practice training your brain to stay in that very relaxed, focused state.
Nose breathing or mouth breathing, or a combination of?
You want to breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And here's why. Because if you breathe, if you're a mouth breather, right, the nose actually holds some of the nitrous oxide, which actually increases the ability to take in more oxygen. So it actually is a better tool. So breathe in nose, out mouth. So you want to expel the carbon dioxide and increase the nitrous oxide, which is going to increase the ability to absorb more oxygen.
Interesting. Don't they say if like someone's having a panic attack to breathe into a bag?
Yeah, and again, it's doing something with the carbon dioxide again.
Hmm.
But the problem with a panic attack And so we got a patent on our whole program based on panic attacks. I wrote the patent originally on panic attacks. And I said a panic attack is a combination of psychological and physical. So the mind is feeling stressed about something. Chances are it's an old trauma loop that's running, but you're not consciously aware of it. So your mind is looking for some danger that doesn't exist. It can't find the danger. So on a very low level, it starts to increase a physiological response. It starts to change the physiological things that are going on. So it's going to start to speed up the heart rate, which is then going to start to burn more oxygen. So then the brain's going to get a message that we need more oxygen. So then that is sort of confirming that there's some sort of a threat, even though the brain's creating it. Then it starts to burn oxygen from the muscle groups, which is going to change the pH. The lactic acid will change the pH of the blood. Another message comes into the brain. The pH has just changed. Now it starts speeding up the lungs, and this loop of danger starts running, even though it's created itself, created. Now the mind is starting to feel threatened again, and it can't find the danger. There is no lion. It's looking at old data. It hits the panic attack. And what people will say is a panic attack comes out of nowhere. But what I wrote in my patent is a panic attack is starting up to an hour before. You're just not aware of it. And so then you then start feeling like you're having a heart attack. You can't breathe. So the idea is the patent that we wrote is we have a device that's coming out now that you're going to wear on your ear, and it will detect when the oxygen level starts to drop because you're not consciously aware of it. And then it reminds you to do what we just taught you to do, and all of it will show up on your cell phone as a reminder to do exactly what we taught you how to do. And then you can shut it down before it ever starts.
Good for you. Congratulations. That is exciting. That's going to make a huge impact for a whole lot of people. I know there's a lot of people out there who suffer from panic attacks.
Yep.
So, wow, good work. Excellent.
And
Um,
they don't know why they're having them. So we give them the science behind it, and then we got the patent approved for panic attacks, anxiety attacks, and post-traumatic stress. So it works on all three.
Fantastic.
Yep.
You'll let us know when that comes out so we can share
Yeah,
that
we
with our.
just announced because we're gonna be probably announcing it in the next month or so.
Excellent. Good, good. Wow. I knew it was just going to be awesome to have you on the show. So tell me about, I have so many questions for you, Dr. Don. We could be here for hours, but I know we don't have hours. I wish we did. Atmospheric conditions. Talk to me about that. What does that even mean? What is it?
What I talk to people about is a lot of people don't understand why people do what they do or why they even do what they do themselves. So, for example, my wife was always living in fear. Great mom, great wife, but not truly enjoying the success we were having. We were doing okay financially, good business, three beautiful children, a beautiful home, but she never looked like she was truly feeling great about it. And I'm looking at this going, man, we're hitting a lot of good marks here. What is it that's not making you really enjoy? She couldn't tell you why. What she didn't understand is that from her childhood, she had a father that was a businessman. He was an entrepreneur, and he had his ups and downs. Plus, he was a very angry, violent guy. So sometimes things would be going okay, and then he's outgoing and throwing money around, and then would lose the money, and then things would come crashing down. So she was really protecting herself. Don't get too excited because you know what happens. Those were her atmospheric conditions that she didn't know that were operating. So if you grew up in that kind of a home, your atmospheric conditions were pretty dark and stormy. So your mind filters through those atmospheric conditions. How good is your thought process going to be if you saw everything through the filter of that kind of childhood? It's going to be filled with fear. And so the idea is to get those atmospheric conditions cleared up because now your mind can filter clearer. And so that was the childhood I had. So I could see things completely different than she could. I was willing to take chances. I was willing to do things. I just did a podcast yesterday with a lady called, she wrote a book called The Success Lie, Janelle Bruland. And what she talked about, she grew up in the kind of childhood I did. And we were sharing stories about how we were willing to do all kinds of things that seemed risky, right? And when I say risky, not crazy risky. So in 2008, her business was struggling like everybody's business. And what does she do? She goes out and buys a new building because it was a good time to get a good deal on real estate. So she's out investing in times where most people would be like, okay, batten down the hatches, close the windows, shut the door, right? She could do that. And I believe a lot of it was coming from her childhood of not having all those fears built in. And so she was able to see things clearer. Like, okay, everything's going down. Good time to expand. Good time to buy, right? And she could do that. Where most people would do the opposite because like my wife would have. She would have gone the opposite and shut down and said, this is dangerous because of her atmospheric conditions. And so getting rid of those and getting those reset is a key to being successful.
It's so true. I mean, um, Warren Buffett even said, "You buy when there's blood in the streets." And most have the opposite reaction. Oh no, blood in the streets, the sky's falling. I remember back in 2000 and uh, 2008 and when things were going south, the equity markets were going south too. And I remember I was in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I was at my summer home, and I was on my computer, and I had the Financial News Network up at that point, or CNBC. It was CNBC, and the headline was, "Is the market going to zero?"
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, if they want to literally scare the pants off of people, that is the way to do it. Posing that, just the question, is the market going to zero? And I remember, Dr. Don, forcing myself to hit the buy button that day. I said, okay, this is going to be, I mean, you could get uh, Ford for like $2 a share. A lot of incredible companies were definitely on sale, down hundreds of percentage points. And it took so much from me to hit that buy button, but that was the single best day I've ever had as a trader, because those stocks quadrupled in price, each and every one of them. None of them went down. It was one of the best trades I've ever made in my life. So, speaking of investing, this is the Intuitive Investing podcast, and I ask each guest two questions about intuition and investing. And investing can be, investing your time, energy, resources into your business or what have you. But I'd love to hear from you. How do you use your intuition when it comes to investing?
Well, I think that's a great question because to me, intuition is a combination of sort of experience and sort of what your life experiences are. So if so from an investing standpoint, if you've had a lot of pain in investing, but your life experiences have been fairly good, right? You can then your intuition would be a little bit different than somebody who's come through a traumatic childhood and had a lot of investment losses. They're going to freeze in that kind of a situation. So, as an example, I was just at a conference. Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a very highly regarded trauma specialist, somebody said to him, why do some veterans end up with post-traumatic stress and another veteran who's in the same situation as the other one doesn't come up with post-traumatic stress? And what he said is simpler what I say, is it was their childhood. The one that ends up with post-traumatic stress had a lot of childhood trauma. The one who didn't have that same experience. So intuition, right, is really built on that. So if you've got a lot of pain in your financial experiences and a lot of pain from your childhood, it's going to be very hard to be as successful. Your intuition will tell you that you need to be protective and you need to pull back. So if you don't get that cleared up, right, that's going to be the way you're going to be operating. Your intuition is always trying to protect you. People don't trust it, but you need to trust it, but you need to make sure that it's absolutely got the right information, right? And so if you if you have a lot of pain, right, then seek a lot of advice and experience. Learn like that the platform you're just talking about, right? That you're just talking about your software program, right? Build your intuition from that, right? Do your study, do your history, figure out what's going on so that when you see that, you'll be able to trust it. And it's just an experience.
That's so powerful what you said, Dr. Dom, because I've never had anyone quite say it that way. What I heard you say was your intuition is a lens that you view the world through, and depending on what you experienced in your childhood, will frame that lens for you. So either it could be a scary thing, like, is the market going to zero? Or, wow, what a great opportunity we have because the market's close to bottoming out. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it.
Awesome.
So if you've had the traumatic childhood, that's what our program is really good at. Clear that stuff out so that you can operate clearer and your intuition, right, becomes even better. But we have a negative bias normally. Our brains are negatively biased from our DNA and genetics because the world's not always been a safe place. There's been lions and tigers and bears, right? So that's built into that's your epigenetics part of it.
Mhm.
So you have to train your brain, right, to stay more optimistic, and that's experience. The great thing I like about what your platform does is it takes a lot of that learning curve out. So you can do your training and learn, and also then I don't know if you have in yours, do you have a background, a way to back test, different things that you wanted to do before or things that you were thinking about? Do you have a back test?
We believe in full transparency, so we actually chart our performance on our patent pending North Star guidance stocks.
Mhm.
And our 5-star stocks are the ones that off the charts hit all of our metrics, the financial, technical, and fundamental indicators, and it'll pop up a buy ranking. So we chart those performances, and we are above the sector performances by 125% over the previous 12 months. So yes, we have all that data.
Yeah. And that's how you build your intuition is by looking at those kinds of things that have already built into it. And literally what your program is doing is using intuition. It's
That's
just computer intuition, right?
yes.
And but you can do that as well. So trust, what was it Reagan that said trust but verify, right? So use your intuition, but verify with a program like yours, right?
Love it. Thank you for that, Dr. Don. That's so true. It's why we created this software, actually, because it's made me a better investor. Before I would get caught up in story stocks and the story of a company, and you can get very passionate CEOs who lie to the camera and about their businesses, unfortunately. And I would buy into that story, load up on the stock, and it wouldn't perform well. So I had to create a mechanism for myself, for investors, that will ignore the story and look at what's important in terms of stock performance.
Yep. And that's really what that intuition is all about. And so the more experience you have, the better your intuition is going to be, but you can also train it. So people think, well, yeah, and I tell you who are really good at this are women. Women are really good with intuition because the world has been much more dangerous for women. And so it typically is. You and I can walk out to our car, at 10 o'clock at night, and we just walk to our car. A woman can't do that. They have to, before they step out that door, survey that parking lot and see if there's any cars near their cars or anybody in cars near their car, right? Or is there anybody walking around the parking lot, right? We don't think that way, but since they've been little, they've had to train to do that. So they tend to be pretty good in that gut feeling and intuition. And so that's
Yes.
developed.
And a lot of what overrides intuition is our conscious thinking mind. And women tend to do better at, I mean, I don't know, are we allowed, are we even, is it legal to generalize? I hate to generalize. I don't know this day and age, but
Yeah,
um, you're absolutely right. I find we have about 60% women in our groups and in our software, and they are by far better investors than men, by far.
they have better intuition. That's
They do.
why. And that came from experience, right? From the world not being safe. So they're willing to like I trusted my wife's intuition. My mother was amazing at it. My wife and mother are the best intuitive people I know. I tend not to have that same kind of intuition, so I trust that. I met a very successful CEO that told me um, before he hired anybody, he had that person come and spend dinner with him at his house with his wife, and his wife was giving the thumbs up or thumbs down. And he
So
says, and
smart.
I trusted it, right? And it was just that gut instinct. But the great part, and the reason I'm saying this is because if women are doing it better than men, it's because they've trained themselves to do it. So you can train intuition with knowledge and with experience. And again, so I'm not trying to sell your program for you. I do believe that it works, and why it works is if I didn't, I wouldn't say this. That is a way to be able to get that experience faster, right? So use your own gut instinct and training, continue to hone that and develop it, and you can do that and add to that with something like your program because it's done a lot of that sort of background for you,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then learn from it.
And learn from it. That's the key. Thank you for that. Um, Dr. Don, I got one more question for you. Tell me, are you making any intuitive investments right now? If so, what are they?
Yeah, I do investing. Obviously not probably to the level that you guys do, but I've made money in the stock market. I've lost money in the stock market, but overall, I've made money. Last year, 2022, I don't care who you were, it's pretty tough, right? 'Cause there was nothing that sort of like I was making calls before that would work. I wasn't I didn't understand the market last year. I really think that like, for example, what's the name of the company? Um, gosh, I'm just drawing a blank on it. That does the sells out from old inventory that they buy. It's sort of that discount place. Autos, not autos. I forget the name of it. But I looked at that and I said, okay, they buy from the big retailers, right, on discontinued stock. And so then they sell it at a discount and they've been very successful. But I looked at it and I said, if the big guys are having trouble with inventory, right, then how are they going to be able to buy anything from these big? So their stock has got to drop. So I'm thinking to myself, this sort of makes sense. I'm going to short that stock because when they come out with the financials, they're probably going to not look that good, right? And I'm buying Nvidia because I'm thinking Nvidia just continues to go up. They've got everything going for them. So to me, there's a short opportunity, there's a buy opportunity, and they reversed. Nvidia comes out with record earnings, record sales, goes down, right? And this other company that comes out with bad earnings, exactly what I said was going to happen, and the stock goes up. And I
That
was like,
is so maddening. I've been there so many times, Don. And however, now sitting here early in 2023, you were bang on with Nvidia because the stock has performed really well. I think it's up 80% in the last, what, 3 or 4 months.
and I
Uh,
stayed with it. I trusted that it was going to continue, so I sort of stuck with it, right? But it's just one of those things where and there's that outcome blind. There was no rhyme or reason. I think last year was sort of an anomaly. I think it's starting to straighten out a little bit now, right? But those are the kinds of, pick good companies with good track records. I think using a stock picker like yours could obviously help with a lot of that kind of stuff because it's going to show you the trends and the way it's going. Um, I'm a believer right now in crypto, so I think that that's another opportunity. I don't think there's any way that this is a .com kind of thing. I think there's a lot of people behind it and a lot of good could be totally wrong, but there's my intuition telling me that I think it's and again, I wouldn't bet the farm on it, but I think it's a good investment, right, to make in a portfolio. I
Excellent.
made a lot of money I made a lot of money on that. So, even if I lost money now, I'm still ahead of the game.
That's right. You make money when you buy, not when you sell. There you go. So you must have bought it at the right price. Don, thank you so much for being on the show today. Very grateful for you and your time and sharing your expertise. I look forward to having you back on our show. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm gonna look at your stock picker because maybe that could help me too.
It sure will.
Yeah,
Thanks very much, Don.
I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Intuitive Investing. If you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. For other helpful resources, please visit sterlingstockpicker.com. That's STERLING stockpicker.com to access free intuitive investing training.